It's no surprise that Google has a long and fabled history of killing its own products and services. This website killedbygoogle.com is like a serial killer documentary. Most of these were murdered because of poor market performance, but other products were ignored to the point where they became obsolete. And it feels like Android is about to fall victim to this same trend. Google is killing Android. No, that's not an official statement from the company, and it's not an Indian news channel hoax either. But it's a slow and ongoing realization that's starting to creep in. I've been feeling very strongly about this since the launch of iOS 18 last month, and even more so after the final public beta release of Android 15 last week. Why does this exist? This operating system has been practically the same for the last 4 years. Android has clearly fallen behind. And before you jump to the comments and disagree in colorful words, let me tell you which team I am on. Among my tech-savvy friends, I have always been very outspoken about my bias towards Android, and I've always thought of it as the superior operating system in almost all aspects. But in the recent past, this conversation has been very awkward for me, because I have had to accept the fact that Android and iOS have had a reversal of roles. Back when this rivalry started, Androids were for enthusiasts who spent their weekends on XDA forums, while iPhones were for South Bombay moms and stuffy businessmen who only used their phones to check emails and book tickets to Thailand. In a nutshell, Android was customizable and iPhone was a status symbol that just works. But I feel like that perception, at least of the iPhone, is no longer true. Which is why iPhones have been getting more and more popular, especially among the youth. People do see value in it beyond just the fruity logo and trypophobia on the back. Which now means that the primary factor keeping a large chunk of Android users away from iPhones is their unwillingness to sell organs on the black market. So, did Apple do something extraordinary to make this happen, or has Google just dropped the ball with Android? If you ask me, I think it's more to do with the latter. And here's why. Fumble number 1, commitment issues. Like I said, Google is infamous for deleting products and services at a whim. And sadly, Android takes after its papa. There are countless features that were either abandoned, removed, or straight up added back just to keep up with the competition. Let's take lock screen widgets as an example. Full-fledged widgets on the lock screen was a headlining feature of Android back in 2012, after which it was removed in 2014. Apple came out with a more restrictive version of this in 2022, and Android got a cheap copy of it only a year later. Android now lets you change the font of the clock and nothing else beyond that. Absolutely no widgets on the lock screen in the current version of Android. Another example is one of my favorite features, Android Beam. It was a very convenient way of sharing small files over Bluetooth without having to dig into settings and pair with the receiving device. This had been a staple feature of Android since 2011. Google dumped Android Beam in 2019, 3 years after which she called herself name drop and started dating Apple. It works exactly the same way that Android Beam did, and Apple has now given it the ability to do digital payments as well. Google could have improved upon Android Beam by replacing Bluetooth with Wi-Fi Direct, but of course it was easier to just remove it from the OS altogether. It feels like Google cannot make up their mind on what they want Android to be, and a lot of their decisions are either dictated by what Apple is doing, or it's a complete shot in the dark like the temperature sensor on the Pixel 8 Pro. Who asked for that again? Fumble number 2, Pixel OS. This is a huge topic to cover entirely in this video, but the bottom line is that before the Pixel phones arrived, the stock version of Android, also known as AOSP, was nearly the same as the software that shipped on Google's Nexus phones. This meant that pretty much every feature that was launched by Google every year made its way to phones from all manufacturers. Ever since Google switched to making Pixels, AOSP has become the child left behind. It hasn't seen any major user-facing changes or feature additions in the past 7 to 8 years. The Nexus line used to elevate the entire Android OS year over year. Pixels, on the other hand, get specialized features that they aren't fond of sharing with others. I have owned a Pixel and a Nexus in the past. The Nexus felt like a true enthusiast phone, while Pixel, although great in terms of its camera, had the most restrictive software experience ever. It feels like a phone that was made so easy that even your grandma does not feel lost. And they did so because that was the primary reason why people used to buy iPhones. Which brings me to fumble number 3. identity crisis. Due to the copying of features over the generations between iOS and Android, it has become more and more difficult to see what exactly are the reasons to get an Android in 2024. Personalization was its biggest strength, but over the years, Google has turned it into a cookie-cutter experience. Launchers, widgets, and icon packs used to be the three haloed features, but today you get shortchanged even with those. On Pixel phones, they won't even let you remove the at-a-glance widget from your home screen. Icon packs still cannot be applied system-wide, and the system navigation gestures just refuse to play well with third-party launchers. It makes for a very jittery and unpleasant experience. The only way to fix that is to root your phone and use a service called Quick Switch, which was a hobby project made by a small team of developers. If Google wanted to, they could have fixed this with a simple API for launchers. But this problem has persisted for about 7 years and they still haven't. Even I haven't procrastinated for that long ever. All of this reminds me of Apple's "we know best" approach, which assumes that the end user will make their own experience worse if you give them too much freedom. And the irony is that Apple itself is saying bye-bye to that philosophy, which is why Android users are finding it more and more compelling to switch to iOS, while the iPhone users were never intimidated by the feature additions because the learning curve was managed so well. Fumble number 4, being dragged down. The best and worst part of Android is the wide range of devices that it runs on. The same software needs to perform reasonably well on all phones at different budgets. This has slowed the progress for flagships while also making it difficult for the budget phones to keep up. Another way this broad spectrum hurts Android is the inconsistent camera experience. Most Androids have amazing camera hardware and great tuning in the default camera app. But the moment you switch to a third-party app like Snapchat, Instagram, or WhatsApp, the quality degrades in the worst way. This is because of the Camera 2 API, which was launched with Android Lollipop back in 2014. It served well back then because phones did not rely too heavily on software processing to make the images look better, which meant that the photos taken from the default camera and a random third-party app did not have a big delta between them. Fast forward 10 years and every phone from every manufacturer does an extensive amount of post-processing for both photos and videos to make them look good, which means that the third-party apps are now capturing an extremely basic, unprocessed and ugly image. Samsung has worked their way around this by partnering with Instagram and Snapchat to make them tune the cameras specifically for the S24 series of phones. But that's probably the stupidest and most impractical approach if you want to cover every Android phone on the planet. Now, I know I sound like a pessimistic yapper right now, but hey, I'm a glass half full kind of person. And I believe there's still time and hope for this situation to turn around. And surprise, surprise, some of the answers actually lie in the past. Solution 1. Segmentation. Making 3 separate variants of Android for flagships, mid-rangers and budget phones respectively. This way, the phones with cutting-edge specs can get features that the budget phones would have whined about. Samsung does this today with different tiers of One UI, and Google has made a half-assed effort in the past in the form of Android Go. Solution 2. Hidden features. Instead of removing the features and avoiding new ones for the sake of simplicity, why not just bury all the power user settings in the developer options so that it does not confuse the layman? iOS does this pretty well. There's a long list of features and granular controls that the tech-savvy audience can explore. Or go one step further and do it like Samsung's Good Lock. Make a separate app that the user has to search for and download and then go nuts with. And solution number 3 is to address the obvious. Bring back the open Android experience that is now lost. Fix the launcher compatibility issues and fix the third-party camera API. Phone manufacturers these days are spending a huge chunk of their R&D budget on the cameras. They definitely wouldn't mind spending just a little bit more to make sure that the photos and videos captured from third-party apps do not look like absolute garbage. Giving them the ability to make system-level camera optimizations that any third-party app can use on a plug-and-play basis would make sense for everyone involved. Google has been making some progress with the Camera X library, but there's still a lot of room for more comprehensive support. There are plenty of other overlooked problems and shortcomings in the OS as well. Google is in no hurry to fix any of it because they think the users do not care. The truth is, Android is starting to feel ancient in comparison with iOS. And if someone like me has noticed this today, the general user will also reach the same conclusion sooner or later. Don't get me wrong, Android still has plenty going for it. Things like the highly tunable notification drawer and desktop-like file management systems are keeping users like me locked into Android. But what happens when iOS copies that as well? Android would just not have a good enough reason to exist after that, other than being cheap. If Google wants Android to survive in the next decade, they need to change their approach to these things soon. Because once their audience gives up on them and switches to the Apple ecosystem, it's going to be nearly impossible to make them buy an Android again. Before I wrote the script, I discussed all of this with someone online and they said Android is too big and too popular, it won't die. I feel like that's a very blindsided statement considering the fact that we've seen the death of Windows Phone, BlackBerry OS, WebOS and Nokia's Symbian. They were all huge back in the day but stuck in their ways of doing things. They failed to address the problems and failed to grow with the competition. Android's old tagline of "be together, not the same" was apt and perfect. But Google should start seeing it in relation to Android's competition instead of its own skins. They seem hellbent on beating Apple at their own game while ignoring the fact that the fans love Android because it's different from the iPhone.